So somehow it's almost Halloween. Again. Where the hell did this year go? I had stuff I wanted to do and it's almost Halloween again. But ignoring the slow creeping sense of existential dread, I thought it would be fun to try and get out another spooky video in time. I am notoriously bad at self-imposed deadlines, so if you see this in October, then hooray! And if you see it after October, well, then I am so sorry. Anyway, I put out a poll asking what sort of lower key Halloween special I can do, and doing a video on childhood trauma buried everything else. Like, it wasn't even close. I really enjoyed YMS's videos when he covered what scared him as a kid, and I'm pretty sure I watched everyone else who also took part in this mini group project thing, so I'm more than happy to talk about some of the things that scared me as a child. When I was planning this video, I started with this idea that despite being an enormous horror fan now, as a child, I was really easily terrified and didn't do well with scary content at all. And then I actually thought of individual moments and films that scared me, and I realized something. I was not easily scared as a kid, like at all. Sure, this video proves that there was some things that really got to me, but for the vast majority of things that scared me, I was under the age of 10. By age 12, I was regularly watching tamer horror movies like What Lies Beneath, 13 Ghosts, Stir of Echoes. I'm pretty sure Lake Placid was in there somewhere.
If I had a dick, this is where I'd tell you to suck it.
So the things that scared me as a child are all from much earlier in life. Not exactly baby level, but definitely before the age of 8. And this brings in something interesting regarding me and media. Although it's more or less my functional language now, I didn't grow up with English as my first language. I picked it up extremely early. I remember my preschool teachers making me recite lines from movies I liked because seeing a 5-year-old speak fluent English was a bit of a novelty. But my grasp on the English language around this time was below rudimentary. We're talking about a 5-year-old child's understanding of a second language. It's not going to be the best. But I really liked cartoons and movies, and most of the things I watched, save for a precious handful of shows, were in English. More than that, if they were live action movies, even the ones made for kids, there would be periods of conversation between characters that child me could barely understand. Sometimes I would simply assume that if something didn't make sense, it must have been because I was too young to understand it. Although most of the time it turned out, no, it just didn't make sense. But this perspective of half understanding a language, but still being invested in a movie, meant that I could only experience movies through visuals, music, acting, and atmosphere. Everything that was not the spoken word. For this reason, it's probably no surprise that one of my favorite Disney movies to rent at the time was Fantasia. Yeah, I'm not kidding. I would rent Fantasia all the time. And you'd think my favorite sequence would be the Sorcerer's Apprentice or the Greek mythology sequence, but no, my favorite sequence was actually the fairies. I feel it's also worth noting that when I went to go see my very first movie in theaters, we passed a poster on the way and I pointed to it telling my mom I wanted to see it because I really liked the way the poster looked. This was the poster. My mom did not let me go and see it. This focus on visuals and sound ended up reflected in what was scary to me. Very rarely were the things that truly scared me monsters or killers or dinosaurs or whatever. Because for the most part, even if I thought they were scary by their very nature, I fully understood them. They wanted to kill or eat you or whatever. They were scary while you watched the movie, but when you turned it off, they were gone. But what really got to me more than anything else were visuals. Things that were ambiguously threatening in a way I could not figure out. Imagery which in of itself doesn't pose a direct danger to anyone, but the mix of cinematography, sound and acting made them unknown and ominous. So here are some of the things I remember most clearly scaring me as a very small child. I think the very fact that I remember them probably says more than anything else. We'll go from the least traumatizing to the most traumatizing. Starting with...
Alright, suck in the guts, guys. We're the Ghostbusters.
I didn't see Ghostbusters or its sequel until I was an adult. probably a good thing, because one thing that did scare me really badly all the way until, well, now, are ghosts. I can only imagine what this movie would have done to me had I seen it when I was 5 or 6. But luckily, I had a fair warning not to watch it in the form of a TV spot for Ghostbusters 2.
When the slime starts to rise.
The Titanic just arrived.
When ghosts start arriving by the boatload.
We gotta find the guys.
There's only one thing to do.
See, because I grew up in the early 90s South Africa, we got a lot of movies, TV shows and cartoons later than everyone else. Also, I don't think I'm ever going to have a better opportunity to show this, but check out this Mnet bumper from the late 90s. Why is it so good for a channel ID?
You gotta follow your heart, follow the fun, switch to the action, come on everyone. All of the magic is real clear, there's a world of entertainment waiting right here. So come on, come on, come on, you ain't seen nothing yet. We won't stop the magic. And that's
Anyway, because of this, a lot of movies and shows technically before my time would release or at least re-release when I was already cognizant. And one of these must have been Ghostbusters 2, because I remember seeing its trailer. I think it was only once, maybe it was on TV or maybe it was on a VHS we rented, I don't know. But the trailer for Ghostbusters 2 had one very specific scene in it which I remember bothered me a lot.
Have you been out on the street lately?
This scene of these minks running down the sidewalk haunted me. The scene where they hiss and snarl right at the camera, oh yeah, that's fine. Them attacking the woman wearing them like this? Well, that's creepy. Don't like that. This scene of them moving like this and still being attached to the fur coat? Big giant nope. My mom has been part of the Beauty Without Cruelty movement since she was in college, so I never in my life had actually seen a real fur coat before. I knew they existed, but I didn't know what they looked like. And the fact that some insane coats actually have the intact mink skins visible on them was something I didn't know. So as far as I knew, this fur coat sprouted these weird, horrible animals I couldn't identify who were like part of the coat but also didn't look like any real animals I knew of. They were just these really awful furry things all attached to the same stretch of fur scurrying down the street. It was just extremely unnatural and I had never seen anything like this before, so it just really put me off ever watching the movie as a child.
It's not unusual to be loved by anyone.
Mars Attacks.
Mars Attacks was a movie we had actually bought on VHS. We really liked Independence Day, so we thought another movie about aliens taking over the world before getting blown up would be fun. And I mean, it was, kind of. The problem was, we were still too young to understand that the entire point of Mars Attacks was that it was making fun of the 1950s pulp sci-fi movies. Because when you're a child, you don't understand things like release years on a movie. I remember seeing a screening of Snow White and then getting very angry when months later it had not been released on VHS so I could rent it. When you're a child, only two kinds of movies exist. Black and white old movies, which were dumb and boring, and color movies, which were new and therefore more interesting. So every tongue-in-cheek moment evoking those 1950s pulp films, I took as 100% serious. And you might be thinking it was the Martians and their weapons that scared me, or the disguised Martian biting off that guy's finger, or the weird dog experiment, but nope. The reason this movie scared me was because it had skeletons in it. I was scared of skeletons as a child, or more specifically I was scared of skulls as a child. Rib cages too, but mostly skulls. And that's it. That's literally why this is on the list. Everything else in the movie I was fine with. I just didn't like the part where they had a bunch of spooky, scary skeletons on screen.
Spooky, scary skeleton.
What the heck was that?
Looked like sort of a big turtle in a trench coat.
I don't really watch the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie. I can't tell you why, but something just put me off. You'd think it was the fact that this movie takes place in New York, mostly at night, is what made me not want to watch it. But no, because once again, I point out that as a small child, I really liked Howard the Duck. And if you want to talk about dark and miserable city settings, despite being Cleveland and not New York, Howard the Duck is loaded with those. I think Child Me actually thought this was New York, because Child Me thought all cities in American movies were New York. And you know what? I really liked 80s movie New York. And I mean late 80s New York. When the city had finally dragged itself free from the 70s, but before big money had moved in to sanitize the city into a soulless husk. I love this setting, but I didn't like the first TMNT movie. The third movie, now that was my shit.
16th century Japan. Brave men ride into battle, fighting an evil emperor.
Wow, I can't believe this is the one I liked as a child. It's almost like it was extremely informative to me. But the first one? Nah. I always felt it was just unpleasant. And I think I managed to figure out why eventually, and it actually boils down to just one scene. The one where Raphael is in a coma or whatever, and they had dragged him away from the foot soldiers and watched April's store burn down. And then they just dumped him into this bathtub and just left him there. Now, I know as an adult, Leo is constantly watching over him and such, but dude, they just took this comatose person and stuffed them into a bathtub that's too small to even hold him and just left him like that. In this dreary room with water dripping on him. Are you really confused why I like the one with the samurai more? Child me did not like this scene. I think I just stopped watching at this point and never finished the movie until I was an adult.
We interrupt this program to bring you Courage the Cowardly Dog Show, starring Courage the Cowardly Dog!
Okay, let's get an easy one out of the way, since I'm pretty sure this is one a lot of kids had growing up. Courage the Cowardly Dog aired in a weird time for me, because when season 1 came out, I was still pretty young, so most of the episodes I felt were really scary. But the later seasons, only a year or so later, had me a little bit older, and they just weren't as scary. And it's not that the later episodes were tamer, the show is pretty consistent with how scary it is. It just happens that the earliest seasons got me at the right age. And if you grew up with Courage, you probably know exactly what episode I'm gonna mention. No, not the one with Fred. That one was fine. Didn't have a problem with that one. No, it was the other one that got me.
Return the slab.
What?
Return the slab, or suffer my curse.
Yeah, it was King Ramses. This fucker who gave all of us nightmares at the time. As an adult, the cutout puppetry animation is extremely primitive to look at, but I also want to remind you that as a kid, when this thing aired, you weren't gonna see it in a nice crisp HD clip. You were gonna see it through the haze of late 90s television sets, which did a lot to actually help hide the visuals.
Return the slab.
What's your offer?
You never got a close-up of Ramses. He was always just far enough away for you to not be sure what you're looking at exactly. Just this threatening presence standing outside your house, and he's just standing there!
He's just standing there, menacingly!
This fear of something ambiguously threatening standing a distance away from you, staring and barely moving, is actually a reoccurring image for things that scared me as a child, by the way. So expect to start seeing that more as this goes on. However, something that is not that at all is Predator 2.
Now, it's coming to a different kind of jungle.
One time when I was 7, my parents went to a house party and I was stuck in the TV room with the other kids I was told I had some or other connection with. At some point during the night, the big kids decided the movie they were gonna watch was Predator 2. I should not have been watching this. This is the only movie I remember actually giving me nightmares as a kid for at least 2 weeks afterwards. I didn't watch the entire movie, mostly because a lot of it didn't hold my attention, but I remember the visuals where human rib cages would be littering the floor. But the violence was not what stuck with me in this movie. Sure, the skulls didn't help, and seeing a weird monster rip people's spines out was not exactly my favorite thing to see as a first grader, but the scene that really terrified me was this one.
Want some candy?
You come here right this minute.
Mommy, I saw a girl! Some candy? Want some candy?
Everything about this scene horrified me. The thermal vision, which of course I had no idea what that was. I just thought the monster was like a dog or something and this is how they saw things. But these weird trippy colors, the child not aware of how dangerous the thing he was talking to was, the fact that nobody could see the monster, and most of all, above everything else in the scene, there was the repeating audio.
Come on, motherfucker!
Want some candy?
Let's dance!
Holy shit! I could actually understand what the words meant, which I think made the scene worse, because it was just nonsensical. A phrase that meant nothing to the monster, spoken by a child, repeated over and over for no purpose with this awful distortion to it. This scene was awful, and I remember seeing the VHS cover in the rental places sometimes and just not wanting to even go near it. Yeah, this one was bad. And no, my parents never even knew I saw this movie. Only that I watched something scary and it upset me. What, did we end up going home early because of this? I need hypnotherapy sessions or something to remember properly. I have PTSD from this bad sequel. If you're anywhere from here to Scandinavia, you know exactly what I'm going to talk about. In 1990, a joint Japanese-Dutch-Finnish anime version was made of Tove Jansson's Moomin books. To call it a success would be an understatement, especially as the popularity of Moomin in general has been rising again lately for reasons that I'm sure are purely coincidental and not reflective of any larger global atmospheres.
Pleased to meet you. I'm so glad I didn't murder your aunt.
The Moomin anime was one of the very few animated shows that got an Afrikaans dub, meaning I could watch it from the age of 3 and actually understand what was being said. What a novelty! If you hear whistling, it's because the bird outside is begging for cheese and she is not allowed to have any more because she will get cholesterol, so sorry about that. The stories were mostly based on Tove Jansson's books, comics and plays. It's very mellow for the most part. Not that there are no stakes, but its focus is similar to a Ghibli movie. It's trying to enamor you with the concept of just being alive, without coming across as saccharine or inauthentic or sanitized to any degree. It's just a show about Moomin and his family and his friends and their bonds and the larger natural world they live in. And then there's the Groke. The Groke is a character directly from the Moomin books, first showing up in Finn Family Moomin Troll. The Groke is a creature of winter, and not just, winter. I mean Finnish winter. Finland's winter. The kind of winter me as a subtropical fruit can only imagine. In the episode Tiny Guests, the Moomin family take in 2 small creatures called Thingamy and Bob, who carry with them a suitcase that they stole from the Groke. Although stole might be a strong word. They're tiny creatures with the mindset of a child. They saw what the suitcase contained, liked it, and so took it. I mean, it's still stealing, but it's different. The Moomin family at first let them stay with them out of hospitality, although they are quick to suspect that the new guests are fugitives on the run. Up until now, the Groke has never appeared in the show, so the audience knows nothing about her other than Thingamy and Bob are absolutely terrified of her.
Something's about to happen, Thingamy. I can feel her coming. That's what woke me up. And I know she'll be here tonight.
Yeah, so it was at this point that toddler me started getting nervous. Before long, the truth comes out regarding the suitcase and the Groke's inevitable approach to take it back when Thingamy and Bob become too scared. This is where the tone of the episode changes drastically. Moomin Papa, since he's the dad, is quick to get the defenses up, making sure all the doors are locked, telling Thingamy and Bob to go hide upstairs, and pulling out a goddamn blunderbuss. And then the episode is just quiet anticipation, waiting for whatever this thing is to show up. There's no music, there's very little dialogue, there's just the sound of the wind as the family plays cards well into the night, waiting for the Groke to finally show up. As a toddler, I cannot stress how unbearable the suspense was to my tiny baby brain. What was the Groke gonna look like? The only description they give is that she's a scary monster. Is she gonna have sharp teeth and claws? Is she gonna roar and try to break down the door? Is she gonna eat the Moomins? What is this Groke gonna be like? What was gonna happen? Eventually, Sniff can't take the tension anymore and just decides to nope out when the lights go out. And this is when we discover that the Groke has been standing on the Moomin's porch for who knows how long in complete and utter silence. So as if that wasn't enough nightmare fuel for toddler me, Sniff runs back into the house and the others come outside to face the Groke. But she has now, silently mind you, moved from the porch to standing directly in front of the house.
He's just standing there, menacingly!
Oh, also thank you for including the soundtrack from The Thing over the Scene anime. I really appreciated that as a child. Moomin Papa tells her to get the fuck out of here before he loads her full of buckshot. After a standoff which takes just way too long, the Groke very slowly turns around and lumbers off into the night. But just before you think it's safe to start breathing again...
It's all frozen. That's the Groke's voice.
Oh, and don't forget, I watched this in the Afrikaans dub, and if you thought the generic witch voice was terrifying... And that's the story of how I didn't watch the Moomins again until I was 25.
My dream, my love,
The Groke episode is to an entire generation of European children what The Mask episode is to Americans. It is legendary in how many children it traumatized. The very next episode has her come back, but this time Moomin is able to trade a heart-shaped seashell for the suitcase, and the Groke's design is considerably toned down, both in her colors as well as her expression and animation. However, these episodes come right after each other, so I don't believe there would have been enough time for complaints from parents to have affected this episode that much, unless there was a long break in production, or they had to really jump in overtime and redo the ending scene of the next episode. The next one on the list is going to be one a lot of people are going to see the name of and go, ah yeah, I know what you mean, this scared me as a child too. But hear me out first, because the next one on the list is Watership Down. Okay, so I have a personal vendetta, not towards this movie, but surrounding this movie. Every motherfucker I have ever seen on the internet talk about this movie presents it more than anything else as the super violent rabbit movie. Every single person. And I am tired.
I'm so tired.
So let me see if I understand this correctly. Anime, right? Anime is a thing. And anime has decades upon decades of content that is some of the most over-the-top gore you have ever seen in your life. And everybody is like, yeah, anime is pretty messed up sometimes, ha 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 ha. And then you have adult animation, right? Like cartoons made for adults. And almost all of them have ultra-violence in at least one episode. People literally being ripped apart. And everyone goes, oh yeah, that's adult animation for you. And then you have internet cartoons, which even in the days of dial-up, had some ridiculous over-the-top violence, which was not only insane, but also interactive. And everyone goes, yeah, haha, the early internet sure was the Wild West. But let Watership Down show a dog hunt a rabbit and suddenly everyone loses their shit. And don't tell me, oh, it's because they're little bunny rabbits. That's why everyone finds it so shocking. Because I never see anyone talk about Felidae this way. Mostly because I never see people talk about Felidae. But then why does Watership Down get this notorious infamy, but Felidae also exists and most people have never even heard of Felidae? And also, don't tell me it's because most people saw Watership Down when they were kids because their parents rented it thinking it was a funny talking animal movie and kids ended up scarred for life. Because you know how old I was when I saw Watership Down for the first time? 4. So explain to me why the handful of scenes in this movie that depict how dangerous life as a rabbit is makes everyone completely lose their minds. And see, the thing is, I wouldn't care so much if it wasn't for the fact that Watership Down is a genuinely beautiful movie, with an incredible amount of care and heart put into it.
There is not a day or night that a doe offers her life for her kittens, or some honest captain of Asla his life for his chief. But there is no bargain. What is what must be.
But lol, forget all of that. Did you know that hawks eats rabbits? Because apparently I didn't, because this movie scarred me for life. I don't know. I saw this when I was 4 years old, and I am being very honest when I say none of the violence ever bothered me as a child. Perhaps it was part because my parents had the 1974 nature documentary Beautiful People on VHS, and I watched that thing more times than I can count. And whereas most people think of the scene of animals getting drunk on fermented amarullas when they think of this movie, the scene which left the biggest impact on me was the ending, where the Great Lake dries up and the abandoned pelican chicks have to trek across the Namib Desert to the ocean.
It is a death march that leaves a trail of little bodies for mile upon mile on the vastness, until only a pitiful few are left alive.
So this mixed with other footage of cheetahs and lions and hyenas hunting for food, and yeah, none of this is shocking or upsetting to me. A rabbit bites the neck out of another rabbit and dies. Yep, that's what happens. I don't know. I just think Watership Down deserves so much more than being the shocking violent bunny movie. Maybe go outside and look at a real animal or something, I don't know.
There's one.
But why is it on this list then, you may ask? Well, since it's not for the violence, and it's also not for the suffocation scene, which I genuinely can't watch as an adult, so make of that what you will. But the thing that terrified me in this movie is the Black Rabbit of Inlay. The Black Rabbit is an interesting concept to try and describe to people who haven't watched the film. The Black Rabbit is the Lord of Death, but not in the way we would think of the Grim Reaper. The Black Rabbit is both death itself as well as the god of death. It is both the concept as a whole as well as a anthropomorphization or personification of it. Rabbits talk about the Black Rabbit in the movie as a terrifying, perhaps even evil thing. A being they fear more than anything, but who they must obey when they hear him. The Black Rabbit itself, however, only shows up a very small handful of times, most notably in the Bright Eyes sequence, where the Warren believes Hazel has been shot by the farmer. Fiver, Hazel's smaller brother, who has a sort of like psychic ability, does not believe Hazel is dead, and in an almost trance-like state, we have a sequence of him and Hazel spending their time together, with the shadow of the Black Rabbit running beside them. And the Black Rabbit's movements are wrong. It only moves in long, drawn-out, torturously slow leaps, fading in and out of existence. It has no true face to recognize, only a black shadow with red, piercing eyes. The song is also one of the most heart-wrenching pieces of music ever, by the way. But also, although death is so near, the Black Rabbit leads Fiver to where Hazel has hidden himself, badly wounded. But the fact that the Black Rabbit was there at all, fading in and out of existence, means Hazel would not have survived if Fiver hadn't found him. The Black Rabbit also appears right at the end of the film, when Hazel has grown to a very old age for a rabbit. In this scene, however, the Black Rabbit does not appear as a shapeless shadow, not until Hazel admits he doesn't recognize him. This time the Black Rabbit is not there as a threat, but as an invitation. It kindly asks Hazel to join him in his run, and when Hazel hesitates because of his Warren, the Black Rabbit gently reassures him that the Warren will be alright without him. And with that worry out of the way, Hazel joins him and the two run off together.
Be cunning, and your people will never be destroyed.
You see why I get annoyed at the violent bunny movie reputation? Anyway, the Black Rabbit terrified me a lot as a child. The abstract concept of death was extremely difficult for my 4-year-old brain to fully grasp. I understood that the Black Rabbit wasn't bad, but I also understood that everyone was scared of him. I knew that when he was seen, it meant something bad for the characters. Not to mention his movements, directly shown in contrast to the other characters, was really scary to me. The long slow leaps with him fading and teleporting around, all without a single sound. It was just a little too much for toddler me. I mean, I still watched the movie multiple times, don't get me wrong, but the Black Rabbit remained a terrifying presence every time. And the number one spot on this list goes to... The fuck is this? Okay, so I might need to give a brief intro to this one. This is the 1978 movie version of the 1862 children's novel / criticism of child labor in Victorian England / pro-Darwin's theory of evolution piece, The Water Babies by Charles Kingsley. No, I didn't make any of that up. Okay, so how do I even start? I actually want to do a full video on this movie, which I already know nobody is going to watch. Partly because I grew up with it and it was incredibly informative to me as a child, and partly because... No, actually just the first part. I think it's technically an independent movie. Anyway, it's similar to Mary Poppins, or more accurately Rockadoodle, in that it's a mixture of live action and animation. Large swaths of this movie's beginning and ending are all live action, but at least 2/3 of the movie are animated. For the most part, it's about what you'd expect in tone for a movie of this sort. But then, every now and then, it hits you with the briefest moments where the vibes are just... they just hit a lot different. Not to mention the intro sequence would never lead you to believe we're about to have a fun underwater adventure. But then again, even though this movie barely adapts the story of the novel at all, we are still discussing a story of a child doing manual labor by an abusive employer. You can add as many gay seahorses as you want to the story.
Hello.
It's still not going to be the most sanitized of settings. Anyway, one part it does match more or less to the book is the character of Mrs. Do As You Would Be Done By. She appears in the movie repetitively, although at no time are you aware of who she is supposed to be. In the book, she is one of the spiritual leaders who are the fairies, and appears to Tom through various disguises, which is the only reason I know who she is in the movie. Tom first runs into her in the busy London streets as a sideshow attraction of a head without a body, which is the only time she's called by her name. Although this is also revealed to be a magic trick, although the meaning of this is weirdly ambiguous. He also meets her again as an old woman carrying firewood. Yeah, that's all very normal. She is repeatedly implied to be Mrs. Tripp, the housekeeper at Hawthorne Manor, which is also completely normal.
Ellie, come back here this minute! Come back here, I say!
And then this happens. Say hello to my sleep paralysis demon. None of the other characters acknowledge this woman's presence when she appears and silently urges Tom to jump to his supposed death. And when we see the implied drowning, her silent face is superimposed over the water as we hear the other characters lament Tom falling into the stream. So that's all good and healthy for a 6-year-old to experience. However, it's directly after this moment that we cut to the animation, where we spend the majority of the runtime to counterbalance all of this. The mystery woman is shown one last time as someone listed as the gatekeeper in the credits, but who appears in the film itself as an ethereal floating face in an empty void the characters swim into to reach the realm of the water babies. I need to remind you guys that none of this is ever explained or elaborated on in the movie. So all of that was weirdly okay for me as a small child, the lady at the creek notwithstanding, but the reason it gets the top spot on this list is for the very last scene in the film. After we've left the animation behind and we're back in the live action sequence, Tom and Ellie run out of the manor into the dark to a nearby river, while Mrs. Tibbs watches from a distance. This would be very whimsical and sweet if it wasn't for the background music making the emotion of the scene very strange. It's almost melancholic in a way, despite nothing else in the scene suggesting anything like that. And then right before Tom proves to Ellie that he wasn't making up the story of where he'd been, we get our final shot of the mystery woman in a scene that I am convinced rooted a deep fear in me of mysterious figures with ambiguous intentions who are just standing there. And which every other thing on this list can probably be traced back to, except for Predator 2. I don't even know what to say. Is there anything I need to elaborate on here? I think it speaks for itself. I think also the fact that I watched my recorded copy of this movie more times than I can possibly count, and constantly getting to this moment over and over again has a lot to do with why this visual imagery is so ingrained in my mind, and has a lot to do with forming what I will find terrifying as an adult. It's all about the vibes. It's always all about the vibes. and how menacingly someone can just stand there.
Get out of here, SpongeBob!
As you remember, 10 years ago, mankind was threatened with the greatest red menace of all. Angry, merciless, killer tomatoes. We were only saved thanks to the heroism of a brave handful of untalented actors.
Are you Rob Lowe?
No, they're back.
This time, we